From cocoon forth a butterfly, his UP from its door, emerged a summer afternoon, repairing everywhere. With apologies and acknowledgement to Emily Dickinson.
Ladies and gentlemen, students, colleagues, and the broad UP community, good afternoon. You are all joining us live this afternoon in Future Africa as we relaunch the drive for curriculum transformation in the University of Pretoria. We could not choose a better venue than this one, which is the innovation hub in our university, where diversity, innovation, critical thinking, among others, are the core values which are celebrated. Despite COVID-19 challenges and restrictions, the university is moving full steam with a drive for curriculum transformation. This affirms the commitment of the university for an inclusive, diverse, and grounded curriculum which represents the diversity, social, and history of our society in the interest of our students. Without any further ado, allow me to introduce panel members who will be sharing their insights and thoughts pertaining to this drive. First, allow me to introduce the Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Tawana Kupe, as well as the DVC academic, Professor Norman Duncan, and one of the architects for the drivers for curriculum transformation, Professor Joel Mudiri, who is the head of department in the Department of Jurisprudence in the Faculty of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once more. And without any further ado, allow me now to hand over to Professor Tawana Kupe to address us this afternoon. Professor Kupe.
Good afternoon, UP students and colleagues. As your Vice-Chancellor and Principal, it gives me great pleasure to relaunch UP's curriculum transformation drive today. As you know, curriculum transformation is the process of rethinking, reimagining, recreating, and creating new courses and curricula in all disciplines and programs across UP, based on a critical examination of current knowledge of the following: context, race, class, gender and gender expression and their intersections, non-binary orientation, disability, religion or religious ideas, sexuality, nationality, to mention but a few. In the 2020 words of Professor John Mendy at the University of Lincoln and Dr. Maria Madiope from the University of the Free State, curriculum transformation in the higher education sector has been gaining traction globally and in South Africa and across our continent, particularly from students, government, and other interested stakeholders, including those in civil society and government and the business sector. According to them, open quote, nearly all 24 higher education institutions in the country were tasked with the implementation of curriculum transformation as a response to the global and local pressures faced to create a new identity befitting the emerging South African educational discourse and practice. Their study further summarizes the 7 areas of curriculum transformation in South Africa as follows: decolonizing the curriculum, student support, technology and enhanced teaching and learning, reinventing assessment through alternate assessment systems, excellence in quality assurance, student retention and throughput, and student access and accessibility. Of course, these are what they identify, but there is much more to curriculum transformation, including what are the sources of knowledge, histories of knowledge, and creators and co-creators of knowledge. Their analysis also reflects how the implementation should be guided by what they call a new socio-democratization framework. Author Tsepo Masipa, in his 2018 article on South Africa's transition to democracy and democratic consolidation, a reflection on socio-economic challenges, states that although the 1994 democratic project has made considerable strides to enhance the well-being of our society, socio-economic challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequalities still persist in contemporary South Africa. Hence, South Africa's governing parties attempt at a program called socio-economic transformation. Some among them call it radical economic transformation. Further, he concludes that citizens often demonstrate their discontent through acts of civil disobedience, protests, to say that perhaps 50 protests occur in South Africa every day. The last decade has increasingly pockmarked South Africa as a theater of social unrest. The article argues that this is the manifestation of democratic distemper rather than consolidation. In other words, democratic consolidation in South Africa should not be misunderstood as a conceptual fiat, but rather as a precondition towards alleviating the socio-economic challenges confronting our society and our nation. And that each and every member of the university must and has to play a role in eliminating preset attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and values. According to the latest data from government, dated 15 October 2020, South Africa lost more than 6,000 formal sector jobs, 600,000, formal sector jobs during COVID-19 lockdown. I'm quite sure it's much more than that, given that these lockdowns have persisted for longer than beyond October 2020. Further, the recent known Gini coefficient, a measure used for inequality, where the coefficient is equal to 0 and 1 represents the most unequal situation of the distribution of income in a country, South Africa indicator is at 0.806, very close to 1. In fact, sub-Saharan Africa does not fare well at all on this indicator. These statistics require of UP to use knowledge and education to make a decisive difference and not to operate as a disengaged institution indifferent to society's challenges. And not being indifferent and being engaged is a fundamental element of being a transformed and transforming university. Transformation requires of us to appreciate that diversity, equity, and inclusion are key elements of progress. Our approaches, attitudes, preset ideas or preconceived ideas, or normative ideas or dominant ideas and stances need a rebirth, spreading our wings to bring forth the democratic beauty and freedom of our university, our country, and our continent. And our commitment to the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them, in UP's South Africa and in our continent Africa's best interest. The critical appreciation of multiculturalism is a prerequisite for an enabling, nurturing, and inclusive institutional culture for our lecturers, our staff, and students in the context of diversity. Curriculum transformation demands a mutual and cooperative approach, attitudes and process, a specific objective and attainable deadline, with the objective to attain synergy, creating and producing impact that is far greater than the sum of the individual elements on UP's 7 campuses. It further expects all of UP members to take a critical stance on power and difference in the classroom and other institutional contexts, interweave multiple perspectives, and integrate students' voices and knowledge in the teaching and learning process to the benefit and transformation of all in the institution and our country. For the sake of growth and development, and one assumes the inclusive growth, equitable growth, one that eliminates all forms of inequality, it is essential for UP to actively and without further delay discard archaic, outdated practices and processes and beliefs that hinder transformation at all institutional levels. For this purpose, UP's management has tasked Professor Charles Maimela, Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Law, to drive this purposeful process to fruition within a given time frame. He will need the cooperation of every student and staff member to enable UP to successfully and actively relaunch its curriculum transformation drive, resulting in significant metamorphosis to change the appearance and character of UP. A UP improved for the greater good of all, now and in the future. To conclude, and in the words of Andy Grove, an institution is a living organism. It has to continue to shed its skin. Methods have to change, focus has to change, values have to change. The sum total of those changes is transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kupe, for those insights. Truly inspiring, and also for setting the tone. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember we are live. Please start now populating the questions for my principals and I to be able to engage pertaining to the drive in relation to curriculum transformation. Without any further ado, now allow me to introduce another principal of mine, which is Professor Norman Duncan, DVC academic, to also set the tone pertaining to the relaunch in relation to curriculum transformation. Professor Duncan, over to you.
Thank you. Professor Coupe, Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Mayamela, Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Law, Professor Joel Modiri, Head of Jurisprudence, colleagues, students, good afternoon. Firstly, allow me to thank the Vice Chancellor and Principal for his inspiring introduction. As indicated in the notices sent to the UP community inviting staff and students to this event, today is the occasion on which we are relaunching and recommitting ourselves to the university's curriculum transformation framework. Of course, it is apposite that we do so this year for the following two reasons. Firstly, this year it is 5 years since the curriculum transformation framework was first adopted by the University Senate to serve as a vehicle for the ongoing processes that are required by universities to constantly transform and update or renew their curricula. Secondly, 2021 is a year in which the university, in all earnest, started the process of reimagining itself. You will recall that that was the theme of this year's Senate conference. Perhaps it would be in order at this point to say a few words on the context in which the University of Pretoria's curriculum transformation framework, namely reimagining curricula for a just university in a vibrant democracy, was developed. On the 5th of March 2016, within the context of heightened student activism on a range of issues, an important Lekgotla was held between our student societies and the university executive. At the Lekgotla, it was decided, amongst other matters, to establish a work stream on curriculum transformation. The work stream was mandated to undertake a process of critical reflection and debate on issues pertinent to curriculum transformation at the University of Pretoria. It was clear at that stage that while important curriculum transformation endeavours had been undertaken in South Africa just prior to and with the advent of democracy in the 1990s, that much more needed to be done. A group of approximately 20 academics and students constituted the curriculum transformation workstream and ultimately developed a curriculum transformation framework titled Reimagining Curricula for a Just University in a Vibrant Democracy. When it was drafted in 2016, the curriculum transformation framework intentionally did not provide a narrow definition of transformation, of curriculum transformation. Instead, flowing from discussions in the workstream, 4 drivers were provided to guide an inclusive process of engagement on what curriculum transformation should entail within the UP context. Of course, the approach adopted was cognizant of the differences in disciplines across UP's 9 faculties and business school, including the requirements of professional bodies. The 4 drivers of curriculum transformation identified are, firstly, responsiveness to social context, epistemological diversity, secondly, thirdly, renewal of pedagogy and classroom practices, and fourth, an institutional culture of openness and critical reflection. Now, cognizant that Professor Joel Modiri, one of the key architects of the framework, will speak more fully on the framework, I nonetheless would like to say a word or two about the third pillar of the framework, namely the pillar referred to as renewal of pedagogy and classroom practices. Before I do so, however, I need to make a slight detour. At the end of last year, all our Deputy Deans Teaching and Learning undertook to assume institution-wide leadership for the following initiatives aimed to enhance student success at the University of Pretoria. The first theme or first topic that was identified was UP strategies to facilitate the actualization of the potential of all academically talented students at the university. Secondly, evolving assessment strategies suited to the 21st century, hybrid and online modes of teaching and learning, and the enhancement of student success. The third theme, curriculum transformation at UP as a vital determinant of student success. The fourth theme, preparing our students for the future of work so as to enhance post-university success. The fifth theme, eliminating differential student success rates based on historical social divides. Those divides include, obviously, but are not, these are not the only ones. It includes race, social class, home language, and gender. The sixth theme, strategies to enhance the recognition of teaching as a critical component of academic careers and student success at the University of Pretoria. The 7th theme, Teaching and Learning for Society 5.0, UP strategies. The 8th theme, my apologies, the deployment of e-technologies to enhance student success in higher education, current and future trends. The 9th theme, well-being as a critical component of student success. And then finally, graduate attributes suited to the 21st century. Now, as indicated on slide 2, Professor Charles Maimela undertook to provide scholarly and practical leadership to the university community in the area of curriculum transformation, and I'm profoundly grateful to him for this. Today's event is the first in a series of curriculum transformation activities that Professor Maimela has planned for the coming year. Now, a word on renewal of pedagogy and classroom practice. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, students, the COVID-19 pandemic has illustrated the vital importance of the continuous renewal and transformation of our teaching practices. I want to argue here that if it had not been for the foresight of the university leadership in the 1990s and the beginning of this millennium, if it had not been for the foresight to start introducing the use of e-technologies in our teaching, we would have come to a cropper quite seriously last year. With that lesson learned, we should constantly strive to see how best to innovate to ensure inclusive student success. This is, in fact, a challenge that I want to address to all faculties. And the challenge is, how can we innovate in the field of teaching and learning so as to ensure greater levels of success for our students while they are at the university and after they had left the university? I'm pleased to announce, colleagues, students, that the Deputy Dean's Teaching and Learning, as well as other key role players in the Department of Education, Department for Education Innovation and the Faculty of Education are currently involved in a process aimed at reconceptualizing our instructional modalities in a manner that will accommodate the rapid social and technological changes we are witnessing at the beginning of the 21st century. Modalities that are best suited to enhancing student success irrespective of their social and educational backgrounds and their preferred styles of learning. Perhaps it is important to note here that when faculties experiment with new ways of doing, they would be well served by heeding the following advice recently provided by Professor Renelle Callahan of the Faculty of Education. Her advice, in short, is as follows. Firstly, the first question, she says, that we should always pose ourselves when introducing any teaching and learning innovation is, are the proposed innovations educationally sound? Now, I want to pause there for a brief moment. I know that many of us are quite fascinated by new technological or by technological innovation. I myself really like innovation for the things that it can enable us to do. But the critical point that Professor Callahan makes here is the fact that we should not grab at technology or technological innovation blindly. Before we adopt any innovation, before we adopt any technology, we must be absolutely sure that it serves our purposes. We must be absolutely sure that it will deepen the type of education we can offer our students and that it will enhance their success. The second issue that she raises, that Professor Callahan raises, is she says our innovation should always ensure that our student-centered approach to teaching and learning is maintained, and that's also quite important. We can easily go astray in our fascination with new things, with what other people are doing, with technology, and forget that the center of our educational activities, the center of the teaching and learning project should be our students. Now, fortunately, the University of Pretoria has a long tradition of ensuring a student-centered approach. That is something that I think we should hold on to into the future. The third point that she raises is that when we implement innovations, careful, responsible, and mindful planning is necessary. To this, colleagues, students, I wish to add the following. As we embark on our curriculum transformation endeavors, we should remember the importance of the graduate attributes important for the 21st century. And here I share with you a list of graduate attributes for the 21st century based on research conducted by Professor Gerrit Stolz of the Department for Education Innovation. I'm not going to read through the list. I am sure that you can read through it very rapidly as it rolls on the screen. Suffice it to say that as we reimagine our curricula, as we try to restructure our curricula, we should bear in mind that at the end of the day, when our students leave our university with their qualifications, that they should have acquired, over and above the qualification, they should have acquired some of these critical skills that have been identified, and that list will evolve, obviously, over the years, and it's for that reason why we are updating the list of graduate attributes on routinely from year to year. Colleagues, students, I wish to close my brief input by alerting faculties to the fact that we will this year once again take stock of the progress made in respect to our curriculum transformation endeavours, as well as our transformation plans for the immediate future. To this end, I'm very briefly going to show you the request that I will be forwarding to faculty shortly. I'm going to ask faculty to provide a report detailing the steps taken by the faculty and departments in the faculty to address the imperatives of curriculum transformation, as will be explained by Professor Modiri, and as outlined in the Curriculum Transformation Framework document for a just university in a vibrant society. Then too, I will ask faculties and departments to describe the future curriculum plans which they are formulating, obviously for the next few years. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's important that we regularly look at our curriculum transformation framework, and so it's fortuitous, it's opposite at this point in time that Professor Maimela had decided to revitalize our efforts to drive the curriculum transformation project. And once again, I want to thank Professor Maimela for that.
Thank you, Professor Duncan, for those insights. But one thing which I could outline and highlight based on your presentation is that the issue of curriculum transformation is a collaborative effort. It's a collaborative effort between students, academics, and the broader society with the whole aim of enhancing our curricula, but also highlighting the points which you've raised, that when we embark on curriculum transformation, the interests of the students are of paramount importance. And furthermore, I'd like to thank you for also sharing with us the historical background as to where the curriculum transformation policy document comes from. And without any further ado, allow me now to introduce one of the people who played a central role pertaining to the current transformation framework document which we currently have in the university, which is Professor Joel Modiri, who is from the Department of Jurisprudence and is currently the head of that department. Over to you, Professor Modiri.
Thank you, Professor Maimela, for the introduction. Greetings to the VC, Professor Kupe, the DVC, Professor Duncan, and everyone who is joining us this afternoon. Should also maybe begin by recognizing the core group of the curriculum transformation work stream that was part of the drafting of this framework document, which I'll be discussing today. Professor James Ogude, Professor Derek de Jong, Professor Christy van der Westhuizen, but other colleagues, Dr. Ndukuyage Ndlovu, Professor Everard Weber, Dr. Astrid Turner, Professor Anton Kok, and Professor Eddie Weber, among others, who are colleagues across the faculties of the University of Pretoria. Indeed, the Curriculum Transformation Framework document, also known as the driver's document, is the outcome of collaboration, co-creation, and also, most importantly, extensive academic peer review. A UP-wide process of consultation was undertaken over a period of a year in order to bring forth an academically grounded conception of curriculum transformation based on the existing literature and scholarship at the time. It's a good pleasure to introduce or reintroduce some of the key themes of this document and some of the imperatives that underlie curriculum transformation for the University of Pretoria, but indeed for higher education more generally. We know that the impetus to transform curricula does not simply begin with the student protests of 2015-2016, but echoes calls that were made long before in post-colonial African universities in the 1960s, and also movements towards multicultural curricula, Black studies, women's studies, ethnic studies in the United States and Europe in the 1980s. In our particular context, of course, the wave of student protests across South Africa, which have gained international traction and have attracted much international study, has placed curriculum transformation, among other pressing issues, on the agenda. One of the most important principles that informed the curriculum transformation program of the University of Pretoria was to remind ourselves that it's not only that transformation and excellence are not mutually exclusive, but that indeed they are codependent. A transforming institution requires the pursuit of excellence, but an excellent institution must be transforming as well. The UP Curriculum Transformation Framework document, therefore, was developed primarily to guide the process of curriculum transformation at the University of Pretoria, in order to respond, as I've mentioned, not only to the student protests, but to also respond to the basic scholarly imperative for a curriculum that is relevant to its local and global context, for a curriculum that reflects the diversity of knowledges, approaches, and worldviews relevant to a particular discipline, and also for a curriculum that would deliver appropriately skilled and broadly literate graduates. The university, as a space of knowledge production, for debate, for thinking, and for ideas, needs to constantly renew and refresh what is being taught in the classroom, as well as how it is being taught. And those were some of the principles that informed the framework document. It's important, as Professor Duncan has pointed out, to say that the framework document deliberately avoids a prescriptive or narrow definition of curriculum transformation. We've realized that there's no one fixed or single path for curriculum transformation. Instead, we offer a broad and open-ended set of focus areas concerning teaching and learning that will help faculties reflect on their discipline-specific issues. So the faculties need to give discipline-specific content to the document. Most importantly, they need to take ownership of this process. And one will see that at the end of the document, we offer some questions for self-reflection, which will guide the evaluation process for this year. So this document, as has been pointed out, identifies 4 drivers, 4 themes, through which curriculum transformation is to be reflected upon and implemented. And I'm going to just give some insight into these drivers. The first driver is responsiveness to social context. A curriculum must prepare its graduates for the world and the context in which they will work and function. The specific political history, socio-economic conditions, political challenges, environmental and infrastructural factors that prevail in a given society, together with the effects of technology and globalization, should inform the content and the structure of the curriculum. In South Africa, the legacy and material reality of colonial and apartheid oppression along the axes of race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, and the disadvantages that these have produced, including underdevelopment, poverty, disease, illiteracy, require both technical and social scientific solutions, but also critical theoretical knowledge that could contribute to the development and transformation at all levels of South African society, the African continent, and the world. The problem of an unequal society, of a divided world, and of a developing nation, therefore, need to be prioritized in teaching and learning. That's what it means to respond, to engage, to be aware of the social context in which we are learning and teaching. So that's the first driver, responsiveness to social context. The second, very importantly, epistemological diversity. Epistemology, or episteme, of course, relates to the question of knowledge, how we derive knowledge, how we validate knowledge, how we know what we know. In order to enable wide learning, a curriculum cannot be dominated only by knowledges or epistemological paradigms emanating from one place, historically the West or the global North, Europe, the United Kingdom, the United States of America. Instead, knowledges and cultural heritages in Africa and those from the broader global South more broadly need to be incorporated into the curriculum. A recurring complaint of students and scholars from the Global South is that our present curricula across higher education represent an exclusively or predominantly Western or Eurocentric worldview and understanding of reality that correlates most closely with a white male heterosexual or middle upper class experience that thereby undermines the ways of life, the ways of knowing of other social groups and communities, including, in our case, the majority group of African students in South African society. The curriculum therefore needs to represent the diversity of knowledges, perspectives, and experiences that make up the tapestry of human history. Importantly, and this is important, the point is not simply to insert these different knowledges as add-ons or extras, but to consider how they enable an overall reconceptualization, a redefinition of the study area, the field, or of the discipline. So epistemological diversity is about more than diversifying the curriculum, but problematizing it, rethinking it, reimagining it. The third driver, entitled Renewal of Pedagogy and Classroom Practices. Partly goes without saying, but it calls for teachers and students to have a critical and self-critical orientation to the learning journey. A transformed curriculum or a transforming curriculum requires also a transforming pedagogy, a transforming way of teaching. Classrooms should be robust spaces of critical thinking and debate, whether they be virtual or in-person classrooms. Classrooms should be spaces that accommodate and embrace differences of identity and worldview, taking into account the dignity of all members of the classroom, but also taking into account the serious challenges of our history. So a focus needs to be placed on key skills of reading, writing, analysis, but also digital skills, computer skills, communication and collaboration. Assessments should encourage independent research. This requires us to move away from what educationists have long critiqued as rote learning, reciting formulaic textbooks and testing for memory, to shifting towards an experimentation with different modes, different models of teaching and assessing, and of course, integrating the latest digital and technological innovations. In rethinking how we teach and learn, we must also provide students, coming as they do from diverse backgrounds, the support they need to cope with the demands of university life. Other impediments to learning, which include the biases and the stereotypes that concern students' abilities, as well as other authoritarian and discriminatory practices in the classroom, ought to be removed from the classroom space. So we need to keep our pedagogical practices constantly renewed, constantly renewing. The final driver, and this is the one we need more work in VC and DVC, is an institutional culture of openness and critical reflection. The curriculum, as we know, is not only the formal study material and content that we teach, but it's also the surrounding milieu in which learning takes place. The symbols, the staff component, the institutional culture of a university play a powerful normative role in shaping learning and in defining who is welcome and who is not. It's therefore imperative that the university becomes a space of learning, debate, and ideas where knowledge and provocation are valued and enabled, where difference of opinion is enriching rather than seen as divisive. This means that the university as an institution must reevaluate its own practices, the standards, the cultures, the traditions, from our graduation practices to our university policies. All these practices that define the university must be constantly re-examined and interrogated. Do they resonate with a transforming university? You'll see that whereas the first three drivers of curriculum transformation address the question of what kind of student UP aspires to send out into the world, this fourth driver, institutional culture of openness and critical reflection, addresses the question of what kind of university UP must become in order to feel like home to this imagined student and to the scholars and teachers that must teach them. In the end, we look forward to a graduate that will have embraced the challenges of a transforming world. Through our teaching and our research, through the facilities and extracurricular activities that we make available to our students, the University of Pretoria aims to deliver to our communities, to societies, to the continent and to the world, a graduate who is in the first place well-rounded, who is thoughtful, who is democratic in character, and who is critically literate. For example, does not embrace untested conspiracy theories and bad science and fake news. We envisage a graduate who will not only be technically skilled, which is important, about the knowledge in their discipline and study areas, but also one who will conduct herself ethically and be able to collaborate and connect with other people from different backgrounds in later professional or working life. This is a graduate who would be comfortable with difference, sensitive to historical injustices, and conversant in the diverse array of knowledges, worldviews, cultures, literatures, and ways of life that they would encounter. The UP graduate is one who would have an appreciation for and a rootedness in her African location and context, while also aspiring to a worldly or global sensibility. Such a graduate would be cognizant of the need to confront our colonial apartheid history, and is also able to contribute to the positive development and transformation of the country, as well, of course, as always, the continent and the world. As such, UP will aim through its transforming curriculum to produce graduates who are emotionally and socially intelligent, leaders who value service to the community and who respect the dignity of all others. These are graduates who would exhibit a deep care for the natural world and also for non-human life. In sum, this ideal UP graduate we imagine through the Curriculum Transformation Framework document is well trained for the world of work, but is also an educated and active citizen, imbued with the capacity to engage with public problems and to grasp and address societal and global challenges through innovative and critical thinking. That, colleagues, in sum, is some of the ambition behind the Curriculum Transformation Framework document. It's not only a provocation and a challenge, but an invitation to us as scholars and students to constantly rethink how we think. Thank you. Over to you, Prof. Mamela.
Thank you very much, Professor Mudiri, for those insights and also for taking us through the paces as to the process which you unfolded pertaining to the 4 drivers, and ultimately to also conscientize us that curriculum transformation does not only relate to the content which we teach, but also the type of graduate which we are aiming for. And this, one would argue, that is in line with the Ready for Work program which we have launched as the University of Pretoria. Thank you for those insights. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, please remember we are live. We are looking forward to have a discussion with you. My principals are here, Professor Kupe, Professor Duncan, as well as a colleague of mine, Professor Mudiri, who are very much willing to answer all your questions pertaining to this exciting initiative which we are relaunching this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to please thank Professor Kupe, Duncan, and Mudiri. Thank you for your elucidation of UP's curriculum transformation policy, your ideas, your suggestions, and the current and future changes and developments that must be taken into account by the 2021 and 2022 work streams as we are relaunching curriculum transformation. As set out in the 2016 policy document pertaining to curriculum transformation, over the past 27 years, some progress has been made in transforming South Africa into a democratic society based on the values of human dignity, equality, human rights, and freedom. Nevertheless, exclusion, marginalization, social injustice, and poverty remain stuck. In fact, COVID-19 has highlighted these injustices even more. Further, as an extract from the 2016 document reflects in relation to curriculum transformation, the interlinked imperatives that have been identified include the transformation of the demographic composition, institutional culture, which Professor Mudiri has outlined very robustly, governance and curricula of South African universities. The UP community shares a deep desire to move hastily or fast to a just and equitable future. We acknowledge the conservative history and corrosive legacy of UP. It is of little use to remind each other of this fact if we do not actively do something about it. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to transform, and we need to transform now. The call to transform curricula is inseparable from a larger vision of a return to the idea of the university as a space for critical inquiry, thinking, and democratic public engagement. As the transformation policy document states, we are faced with the challenge of the corporatization of universities, which undermines transformation. The policy document further states that a transforming curricula resists corporatism and managerialism, which includes instrumentalist versions of internalization that merely service the academic, social, and political objectives of the global north to the detriment of local knowledges and objectives. It must be a curricula that asserts and celebrates local capacity to produce cutting-edge research within a global reach. As you've already heard, the 2016 work stream discussions identified 4 curriculum transformation drivers, the purpose of which was to guide an inclusive process of engagement on what curriculum transformation entails. And here I must stress that an inclusive approach means a climate in which everyone can endorse their knowledge and talents so that these can be used in the most efficient way and to the greatest benefit of all. In fact, inclusion is not a strategy to make people fit into existing systems and structures. The approach adopted in the 2016 transformation policy document is cognizant of the differences in disciplines across UP's 9 faculties, including the respective requirements of professional bodies. The point of departure remains that every field of study holds implications that either advance or deter human and non-human life. Thus, academic endeavor, prominently visible in curricula, must be in service of the public good and the actualization of human potential. To conclude, I also believe that all of us involved in curriculum transformation at UP must also realize and agree that innovation and leading teaching practices are essential components of curriculum transformation and best undertaken in an educational ecosystem where values such as a culture of cooperation and partnership exists. Lecturers or academics practice their own responsibility for innovation. Performance measures, are meaningful and shared and fair. Where passion for teaching and creativity is reignited, as UP we are championing this point. Lecturers' work is sustainable, rewarding, and life-giving. Lecturers are supported and enabled to lead curriculum transformation through the implementation and sharing of creative and engaging teaching strategies. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And now I would like to move swiftly to the question and answer session. The first question which we've received this afternoon, which I will give each panel member to answer, is how will transformation be practically applied in lectures? You know the joys of being a moderator. You are not answering questions, but you are making the panel members to answer the questions. So today I'm very much honored that my principals will be answering questions, and it will be the first that I give instructions to my principals this afternoon. So without any further ado, I will allow the DVC academic to shoot pertaining to this question from Lizelle Dupreez as to how will transformation be practically applied in lectures. Professor Duncan.
Well, I think, Prof. Maimela, it's fairly straightforward. Obviously, it's an important question. It's a question to which all of us should apply our minds all the time. But what Professor Modiri has outlined is really the structure and the framework and the criteria according to which we would want to translate our aspirations in practical terms. So, for argument's sake, the framework speaks about the content of the content that we teach. Now, of course, how far we can I suppose, amend and change what we endeavor to teach will depend on the discipline in which one finds oneself. But let's take the discipline with which I'm familiar, say history. you critically have to ask yourself in terms of the content, is this type of history that's being taught useful to a global citizen, but critically also for an African citizen? Or is it a history that we're teaching, the type of history that you will encounter at Harvard, or the history that you will encounter at UCLA? There, the history program might be crafted in such a way to be meaningful to the students from those contexts, but that program is not necessarily meaningful to ourselves. The issue of technologies and the use of technology, or at least the role of technology in the transforming curriculum, I think is also critically important. I mean, when the years when I was at university, universities functioned, or the classroom was fairly standardized. I mean, all classrooms looked the same. You had one lecturer teaching a group of students, assuming that all students have similar capacities, and that how he or she conveys message will be understood in similar manner by all students. We've arrived at the point where we realize that students have different abilities and different strengths, and the way in which we engage with them cannot be uniform. It has to be attuned to individual students' needs. So that too is another part of transformation. The point that Professor Madiri made repeatedly, I think, however, is critically important. Does the student feel at home in the class, whether the class is virtual or whether the class is, whether we have an in-person class? Does the student believe that this is her space, this is his space? Because it's only in that context that learning can take place optimally. There's a whole lot of other things, but if one reads the framework, one gets a very good understanding of what you can do in practical terms to transform. And we do transformation not for the sake of transformation. We do transformation to ensure that the students that we engage with will have a good quality education, that they will succeed in their endeavors at university and beyond the university, and that they will be the types of citizens that can help us transform our society into becoming a more egalitarian, more equal society, a changed society. That will, is the type of student that will help address some of the, or at least contribute to addressing some of the major obstacles facing humanity in the 21st century, etc., etc.
Thank you, Prof. Duncan. Professor Kupe, your insights?
Yeah, I like this question for very subversive reasons, because I think it is the question actually that Liesel must answer, and also the students in the class must answer. Because you see, what attracted me to being an academic was precisely my parents were school teachers. My father was a principal, and my mother taught me in grade 1 and 2. From what I could see growing young, they were given very set parameters on what to teach. What attracted me about university is that I had some autonomy, even freedom, about what I could teach and how I could teach and how I could engage with my students. Even with managerialism, the manager does not get into the class, or the VC is not sitting at the back of the class, if you want to be practical. So that means that there is room for actually practicing your autonomy and your knowledge in ways that are transformative. So for me, in this, since we have a framework, which is an institutional document, I would like every lecturer and every student to answer that question. What shall I do and what am I contributing practically to transformation in lectures? Because here, this question is very precise, in lectures. It's not some holy thing about the institution as such. And I think that because you can't, when it comes to lectures or anything, you can't decree transformation from above. It has to actually come from below in that creative, innovative process of people engaging in order to create knowledge.
Professor Mudiri?
Yeah, just to continue on the question of sort of practical examples, I mean, it starts from, you know, in a way when one walks into the classroom. So what kind of examples do we use in the classroom when we're trying to explain facts and scenarios? The names that we use in these fact scenarios, Tom and John and Lucy, you know, in an African majority country. Yeah. When you're having debates and discussions in the classroom, who's talking over who in the classroom? If there's a particular demographic speaking as a lecturer, you stop the conversation, say, I'd like to hear from another person, or I'd like to, you know, it's how you manage conflict and debates in the classroom, you know, as they, you know, unfold in a classroom discussion. You know, so it's a multifaceted way of making the students understand. The jokes that lecturers make, you say, oh, students working late, you say African time, you know, things like that. These are the kinds of small little things that you rethink in how you make the classroom a space of vibrant discussion. As a lecturer, do you just walk in and read from slides or read from a piece of paper and then dismiss the class? Are you open to question, to interrogation, to difference of opinion in the classroom? And how do you make that part of the discussion? How much time in the classroom is made available for student engagement versus simply the lecturer, you know, the sage, what do they call it, the sage on the stage? So there are a number of things that are quite practical, and the document says them out very clearly, and it requires all of us to reflect. And I like what Professor Cooper says. It's not only for the lecturers to ask themselves, how do I make this a livable classroom, but we also want our students to say, how do I behave in the classroom? It's from the basic things of arriving on time to how you engage, how you participate, paying attention, listening to your fellow colleagues, not sneering when colleagues, when you're having controversial or difficult discussions in the classroom. Those kinds of things are part of how you practically engage being, transformation in the classroom. But there are many other ways too.
Okay. Now, since we are operating under COVID-19 and also with the introduction of devices, among other things, in our lectures, so one student, maybe I can be a silly student, would I say that's transformation in the classroom, that we are now using narrated PowerPoints, we are using different teaching aids to ensure that the content which we deliver, we fully exploit the technological advances. Would you classify that as a form of a transformation?
It's a necessary but insufficient condition of transformation. It's a component of a larger vision of transforming pedagogy, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about. And it's linked to this question that I see: what steps can students take to be an active participant in the process of curriculum transformation? Well, firstly, the students should work through their student bodies to bring their questions and issues to the attention of their faculties, where they feel there are gaps, where they feel there are inputs they'd like to make. But the second and most important thing is that the curriculum that we offer in the university is I would say, maybe 50% of the education that a student must get in a university. We have a library that's freestanding for students to walk in and figure things out. I mean, every year I get emails in my legal philosophy class of students saying, but this theme wasn't covered and that theme wasn't covered. Then I say, well, it's in the library. I can't teach you everything. Go to the library. So we also want students to have some self-critical and self-learning capacities. Really, what we're giving them is a push into a wider body of literature and a wider body of knowledge. So I would say that students should take full control of their own learning inside, but most importantly, outside of the classroom. We don't have to teach you everything. You can also, figure things out by yourself. We have a very well-resourced library there, electronically and physically. And we've seen the importance of the library, with what recently happened at the University of Cape Town. So our students must value those other avenues of learning outside of and away from us. And this is important to tell you because most of the scholarship that I now do, I didn't learn in the classroom, but I learned at UP. And that's important.
Okay.
Something. A condition of learning, and I think of transformation, is that you must be curious. You should not be at university if you are not curious. So if you are curious, the set curriculum is, as Professor Modiri says, is not enough because you are in a search for knowledge. And also you want to use that knowledge to develop your own capacities. Because I think that's something that seems to be lost now is the curiosity. Because without curiosity, it's not possible to learn. It's not possible to do research and to rethink things or to question things, in fact.
Thank you for that. Prof. Duncan, as a University of Pretoria, do we have the necessary processes as well as structures in place to enable our students to actively participate in discussions pertaining to curriculum transformation? And I married this question with that one of Mariska, where he or she is saying, what steps can students take to be active participant in the process of curriculum transformation?
I suppose, Prof. Maimela, I just need to refer to the process that initiated the curriculum transformation process at the University of Pretoria, and that is that part of the work stream, at least a number of the work stream members were students. So students had co-crafted the framework. We also have various systems at the university. allow students or enable students to participate in ongoing transformation of the curriculum, because what we had formulated in 2016 will not exist, will not be appropriate or pertinent for long into the future. It has to evolve all the time, and so we expect students obviously to, as is the case with lectures, to be constantly part of the process of reimagining, I suppose revising, renewing the curriculum. A vital vehicle for student participation at that level, obviously, is our class rep system, which I know has worked very, very well at our university over a number of years. Unfortunately, I've not had a meeting with our class reps for the past year, but we will have one this year. We've engaged with students about the content, about all matters, including the curriculum, and that then will give them an opportunity also to influence where we are going to in future. Prof. Modiri, you had been part of the group that had included students. Perhaps you might want to elaborate on my contribution.
Yeah, it's linked to what I mentioned about co-creation. This was very much a university-wide document. Obviously, some warm bodies have to ultimately do the typing and the formulation of the final product. But we started actually from a clean slate. We started with a number of meetings in the work stream by asking everybody there, students, staff, and I think there were also some support staff. And I should just mention here that the Department of Student Affairs also played a crucial role here. Dr. Matete Madiba, who I forgot to mention, was also in this work stream. So, you know, students began to contribute. They gave us experiences. In fact, students also nominated some of the staff members that they wanted onto these committees because of their own learning experiences. So students were very much part of the process and indicated some of their experiences which were very helpful. When we had the faculty visits initially, we also made it clear that we would like students to be there and to participate. But I think, you know, without belaboring the point, students must know that the university, as it were, is your oyster, and you have resources to take your education further outside of what we can offer you in the limited 12 weeks, 14 weeks of a semester course.
Thank you. Professor Coupe?
I was a student a long time ago, given I'm not far from retirement. But I remember that when I involved myself in curriculum transformation, I was a student of literature in an English department. An English department typically is a place where, in our parts of the world, where transformation has happened very lately. 20 Shakespeare's is what I had to do in my first year, 20 English novels, and perhaps another set of English poetry, no African writer. Whereas in my A-levels, or the equivalent of matric, I had actually had the chance to do African literature. So we started agitation, and I was a student representative. But one lecturer told me that always you must put your ideas in a document, that the person with a document, you know, is able to negotiate something out of that document. So what we did, well, it wasn't like these days. These guys have Google and all of that. They can Google the curriculum wherever in the world and say, this is better than. We had to actually, in a sense, talk to people who had gone before us. So we spoke to the people at the University of Nairobi, and we wrote down by hand also what we thought should be in the curriculum. So I think nothing should really stop students doing that, but also they must exercise, again, let me repeat, their curiosity about what happens elsewhere. Because the problem in South Africa, of course, also is often the insularity that came with apartheid, not knowing that across the border in Lesotho, there might actually be a better curriculum that has been transformed since, you know, the 80s or since the 70s. So very, very important in a sense to learn from others. And also to be able also to say, this is what I want to see, and to structure it, because it forces you to the logic of what should a curriculum look like? Because it's all very fine to protest about curriculum transformation, but you're asked, what would you like to see? And you don't have an answer.
Thank you. Next question is from Peaceful Mabeta. And this one, I would also put the VC on the spot. How do we overcome challenges of advancing cultural and social responsiveness in our curriculum while remaining competitive, I beg your pardon, in a space where the West sets the standard of excellence? Bearing in mind also, we also have exchange programs with institutions in the West. So how do we then strike a balance in ensuring that our curricula is not dictated to on the one side, and on the other side we are able to forge these relations and ensure that we learn from each other?
So from my knowledge, the curriculum in the West is not homogeneous either. Actually, so we should get away from this notion. There could be a dominant element in the West, but they are not the only example. So there is curriculum arguments in the United States, in North America, curriculum arguments in Europe and in departments of insurgent people saying that this curriculum enforces the notion of empire and is responsible for, atrocities committed across the world. So again, seeking other examples is very, very important, but also questioning the notion of how does standard relate to context? You can't have standards that are decontextualized, set elsewhere. Every standard has a context. You got to ask, I think, in the spirit that Prof. Duncan and Prof. Modiri said, how is this relevant to us? Contextual relevant is also about what impact you want to create in our society. So through all of the documents we have done, the one thing we must really do is get out of the university and say, okay, we can learn all of this, argue about curriculum transformation. Why does it matter to an unemployed person in Mamelodi? Because if we don't do that, we lose contextual relevance, and the curriculum transformation will be a bun fight inside these hallowed walls that we occupy as the academy. So the West is not our context, except in the sense that if we are going to relate to them, there must be co-creation of standards, there must be co-creation of curricula. So a notion of internationalization, I was on a webinar last week where I was not very popular, I think. I was the only vice-chancellor from this side. The question was, how will international mobility of students return to normal by September? In the assumption that it was a good thing. I told them that no, I hope COVID kills that model of internationalization. Because it was an extractive model where the bright students from our parts of the world go to the West. And I told what the standard is. I said, we need a new form of internationalization which recognizes that Africa is part of the international. There is an international, then Africa. And so I think that a questioning attitude, which is what my colleague said, a critical thinking, questioning attitude, not accepting what you believe, and this should be rooted in what we did in the 60s and 70s, 80s in South Africa, critiquing the empire and suggesting a different kind of society.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. Kube. Prof. Duncan?
Yes, I suppose I can't articulate the ideas any better than what the Vice-Chancellor had, but one additional point that I could possibly make, or one additional emphasis that I can place on the discussion is the fact that social, cultural appropriateness and excellence are not mutually exclusive. In fact, in order to strive towards excellence, you have to be socially and culturally appropriate, or the work that you do. What sense does excellence have if it has no relevance or no meaning in your current context?
Prof. Modiri?
I mean, it's linked to the notion of relation. Cultural and social responsiveness is not about withdrawing into the local. It's about locating yourself within a precisely global field. So we are not saying that our students must only focus on the borders of South Africa. That would be impossible. Economically, socially, culturally, we've had multiple flows in and out. The first, of course, mode of internationalization that we know is, of course, colonialism, and that has left its own remnants. But the point is that maybe responsiveness might not be the right word. It's about situatedness. It's about knowing where I am in relation to everything else that's happening. And I think that's the first point. But the second, I think, more important point is a point that's been actually made by great giants in African literature and African scholarship, which is that we acquire relevance by being local. Because that's what you bring to the table. Now, if you go to Germany and you want to teach them Hegel, why are you doing? They know their Hegel. You've got to bring your philosophers to the table. You know, you can't go to Russia and teach them Dostoevsky. Teach them Bessie Head, because that's the point there. So, and it's linked to what we're talking about how we build connections and relationships. So, by having a good authoritative understanding of where you are, that's what you bring to the rest of the world. You know.
Thank you, Prof. Modiri. Another question from Lelani Smith. I will start with Professor Modiri, as he's a new HOD, because it relates with issues of KPIs. Lelani is curious what is planned to retrain staff members to teach or facilitate a different type of educational experience for students, and how will the KPIs will support this development?
Oh, I initially saw the word retain and I was scared because I don't do retention work. But yeah, let me start by saying that on the one hand, the university has a quite advanced infrastructure. I mean, comparatively South African University, of a strong educational innovation office that supports multiple areas of teaching, practice, and development. There are also short courses that we offer through Enterprises UP, which focus on different elements of improving one's undergraduate and postgraduate teaching. So there's lots of opportunities for upskilling. The university generally supports its staff members to, in fact, study abroad or study in other universities, to upskill themselves, to do higher degrees and higher diplomas in education and so forth. University has got the resources and the support there. But as scholars, we should be constantly retraining ourselves anyway in the literatures and the developments that are happening in our field. So the degree of how much retraining is needed is actually a good index of where we are in terms of transformation, because generally we should be moving with the times anyway as scholars. We should be part of conference activities, we should be reading the latest journals in our field, we should be studying the latest literature in our field, which is telling us this is the direction where learning is going, this is the new student profile, and we should generally be seeing over the years that, okay, our students are changing, the emotional, psychological learning needs are changing, and we should be keeping in touch with what the university is visioning and envisioning for change. So it's not planned. There's already a lot of support available for staff members who want to upskill. But secondly, academics should constantly be developing their own toolkit as teachers and scholars. Regarding KPIs, two things. I mean, I see the performance management process as not meant to be primarily punitive or managerial, but really a planning tool. So it's actually meant to support this upskilling element. It's for you in the beginning of the year to say, what are my ambitions this year? Where do I see myself contributing as a scholar? Where do I see myself contributing in the classroom? It's about reflecting on what were the ups and downs of teaching last year, how do I improve those, how do I fix those, and you make sure that those are reflected in the KPIs. The performance management system that we have is quite broad enough to capture different experiments, endeavors, and attempts by staff members to shift. But we should also be retraining ourselves, but we should also ask our HODs, deans, and HR office, what's the support there if I want to upskill, or if there's a specific gap that I see in my toolkit that I can improve.
Thank you. VC?
So for me, I think like the way I like that Leilani put retraining quotation marks because I don't associate it with intellectual activity. But anyway, I know what he means. What is really important here, which is what Joel was saying, is that keeping an intellectual climate in a department or in a faculty is vitally important to retraining. So like you said, perhaps seminars, discussings, conferences. If a school or a faculty or a department does not have regular seminars where students can also come in and listen to their lecturers debating each other, something is lost there. And it's actually the institutional culture of ideas, thinking, critique, is somewhat reduced or if totally absent. And therefore, no amount of KPIs of a quantitative nature is going to actually produce an excellent department, excellent scholars and students. The KPIs, I think, for an academic institution, for an academic department or faculty, are largely qualitative, broad enough to allow people to experiment, to argue, to critique, and to develop. Of course, some of them might be there. You also have to make sure that you are supporting students to progress. And so you can't have a department where students are failing year on year and it's getting worse by the day without some measurement coming in. But no measurement will infuse that intellectual spirit that excites everybody, that makes everybody curious, that makes everyone actually to succeed.
Thank you. DVC, your input?
Yes, I suspect that part of what is hidden in that question relates to the level of support we also offer our lecturers, and particularly early career lecturers. So to a certain extent, the question points us in an important direction as well. What I can say in this regard is obviously, as Prof. Madiri had said, that we've got a very good department for education innovation that offers ongoing support to lecturers, that's crafted to individual lecturers' needs. And then, of course, Prof. Maimela, I mean, you are the point person now for curriculum transformation. I mean, and so you would be able to, I suppose, without me adding work to your plate, advise departments about how they can go about to ensure that we improve, or at least that lecturers receive the necessary support in this regard. I do think that, I mean, yes, it's important that our lecturers are encouraged to acquire the skills independently or by themselves to broaden their vision, but sometimes a level of support is required. Is the other person that will be working in this field would be Professor Paulette Bloomer, who has undertaken to focus on development of lecturers as a critical determinant of student success.
Okay, thank you. And also, ladies and gentlemen at home, I think with this curriculum transformation, the record has been set clear that performance management is not for bonuses, but among other things, to take stock of our respective careers. Now we have another question from a colleague in the Faculty of Law, Dr. Merkot. And this question I'll start with Professor Mudiri. And Dr. Merkot is asking, the curriculum transformation relaunch has been framed in a thoughtful way. The challenge will be in its implementation in faculties. I'd be interested to hear the concrete next steps.
Well, that's partly for Deputy Deans to answer,
Yeah.
but yes, as I indicated, the document actually contains some very useful self-evaluation questions. I mean, let me just say that the academic endeavor is intellectual, exploratory endeavor. You cannot force people. So the point is that it would be very hard to, to pull people and kind of have a fixed checklist of, are you transforming? I think the starting point, say to colleagues, it is good for the university, it's good for you as a scholar, it's good for you as a teacher to constantly be rethinking the knowledges and the practices that you bring into the classroom and into your research practices. But concrete next steps, there are some self-evaluation questions at the end of the document, which you can actually ask at all levels. A lecturer can ask themselves those questions in relation to their subject, a department can ask itself in relation to its offering, and a faculty can ask itself in relation to its degree programs. Then secondly, there has to be some kind of benchmarking process, which I understand will be embarked on this year, for faculties to say, we've known this document for 5 years, here is what we've done. Some of the challenges that we've picked up is that some colleagues argue that some subjects are more susceptible to the full engagement with the drivers than others. That may be true in some sense, but there's no subject that is immune to transformative imperatives, transformative focus, transformative pedagogy, transformative knowledge. I think that's clear. And so I think that what we need in faculties is to support the lecturers through the intellectual element, not the disciplinary element or the managerial element, through the intellectual element, the research seminars, asking colleagues, what are you reading? Having book clubs within departments, those kinds of things, where colleagues actually will be re-excited. I mean, for me, transforming curriculum is the byproduct of simply having a passion for your field and for what's happening in your field. But the concrete steps are the faculties will report this year on what they are doing. And the second concrete next step will be, we would like to see the pockets of excellence in the faculties. Where are the people who have really done an excellent job, who can also give tips, examples, hints, and their own experiences to help other colleagues who are interested but are struggling to find the resources to get to it. And that's where I would say the next concrete steps must be. But there has to be some kind of evaluation of how far we've come, which I think is happening this year.
Thank you. Visi?
So this is interesting because before I came here, looking in my email, I got this article from the Times Higher Education. It says, the title of the article is, How Decolonized is My Curriculum? There's an app for that. So Imperial College in London has created an app to analyze geographic distribution of tags, references in each person's curriculum. I'm not so sure this is just a matter for apps. There's an app for everything these days, as we know. However, it will be a useful tool towards a broader intellectual discussion. So a faculty could easily say, once a year or twice a year, let's have anyone present on their notion of, because also remember that the notion of decolonization of a curriculum is also contested among colleagues. So let's have those contestations. But people could actually, present on how they've transformed a course or changed their curriculum as an inspiration to others and open to students would be nice. Yeah.
Thank you, VC. DVC, your input?
I'll take the next question.
The DVC will then take the question of Dr. Bradley, who's also from the Faculty of Law. And Dr. Bradley is asking, how has COVID-19 highlighted the need for curriculum transformation, and has ERT, which is Emergency Remote Teaching and Learning, inspired new ways to transform the curriculum?
That was an easy question. That's why I volunteered to take it. I think every single lecturer at the UP would be able to identify with that question and respond in the affirmative that the COVID-19 crisis, or at least the lockdown context that had resulted from that, had really forced us to look at what we teach and how we teach. Now, at the level of how we teach, I mean, all of us, everyone changed. I mean, whereas previously we've taught in a hybrid mode, now we had to be primarily online. And when you teach online, you have to rethink what you're doing and how you're doing. I had a discussion with colleagues in health sciences recently, and one of the people said, I mean, it's clear, I mean, this year I have to look at what is meaningful for students. In the past, I could just do what I thought was working. But this year, I knew every single minute is important. So I had to check what is useful for students, what will they be able to utilize in their professions or whatever they're going to do in postgraduate studies, and only include that. So already we have a rethinking of what we're doing. I mean, in last year's Flexible Futures Conference, I quoted someone who said that COVID-19 has forced us to change our ways of teaching and learning, and teaching and learning will never be the same again. And I hope that's the case, because COVID-19 has forced us to innovate in quite radical ways. Obviously, sometimes it was not the changes we had to undergo, or the change that we had to make were not a change of choice. They were not things that we wanted at that point in time or would want for the future. But many positive changes were possible under that within that context of crisis. How does the saying go? What is the mother of invention? Necessity.
Yes. VC?
So, for me, Dr. Bradley's question has made me start thinking again that is it really useful the way we organize knowledge along disciplines? Because this is also an inherited thing from our colonial masters. And so, because COVID, I think, the pandemic, and there are other pandemics, we will focus on the virus, but we have other pandemics in our society, in South Africa: inequality, poverty, unemployment, gender-based violence, and femicide. But all of these things cannot be treated from the way in which even our organizational structure is all British-style faculties. They don't have the same in the US, for example. We should now rethink how we organize knowledge, because it is also about the origins of knowledge, stuff we spoke about, the sources of knowledge, what we validate as knowledge. Is disciplinary organization still useful in the manner in which we do? I accept that there is grounding. There must be grounding in disciplines. A lawyer must know what a contract is, all of that and all of that. But is it necessary simply to structure it in a faculty of law with very specific departments that do not speak to each other? Are these silos and boundaries really consistent with the nature of knowledge in a disrupted world? Yeah.
The next question is from Derek de Jong, and I will direct it to Professor Modiri. And Derek is saying, talking about concrete next steps, what would be the next step towards institutional culture transformation? For one, a culture of open, critical, and reflective communication.
Yes, I mean, I think we added that driver, and Professor De Jong was, of course, one of the colleagues there, so I think he's asking, what has happened since. We added that driver because we saw the need to also look at UP itself, and we looked at a number of strategies that could help University of Pretoria reflect on its past and reflect on its practices. I mean, I think the first thing is that we saw, especially during the time of the protest, was that there was a waning of democratic deliberation within faculties. There was a sense that decisions were centralized, that faculty boards were not being called upon to be the engines of decision making and the engines of deliberation. There was a clear sense at the time that had come from the student bodies that students are basically not being heard, that the student voice was dwindling, you know, despite the fact that there were protests happening. But they were saying one of the impetus for the protest was the fact that the existing institutional mechanisms for deliberation and discussion were not there. But that driver on institutional culture of openness and critical reflection had other things. You know, we need to look at, for example, our graduations, our graduation gowns, and I assume those are going to be some of the next steps, because we need to look at, you know, the music that we play in graduations, the rules about vuvuzelas. I know we've relaxed some of them, but there's a whole set of things we need to look at about what kind of place is the University of Pretoria situated in Tshwane in 2021, and how will it be in 2031 and so forth. So I'm hoping that part of the evaluation processes will not only be at faculty level, but that there will be some kind of university level consideration, because some of these issues are faculty, especially the first three drivers, I think, relate to faculties. The fourth one, yes, faculties must look at their own institutional culture and they must give inputs at Senate and at a higher level, but perhaps a kind of a smaller Senate work stream on UP level related institutional culture questions, the archive, research that we need to do. Professor Duncan and I have always been talking about this idea of doing an institutional histories project. I know it's now being done at another place, but those kinds of things. Where does UP come from? What's the history of discipline? How did UP contribute to certain kinds of things? Those are the kinds of questions that we can look at. So hopefully that will also be part of that concrete planning out, and I hope that Professor De Jong will be available to also assist in his faculty and elsewhere if called upon to do so.
Thank you, Prof. Mudiri. VC?
Yeah, I like the idea by Raymond Williams that culture is everyday life. And so if culture is everyday life, it's also about how we relate to each other on a daily basis in these spaces that have a history, as you said. But also, I think that in 2021 or even 2020 or post-94, we need to ask the question that if we're going, we have to create new institutional culture for the whole institute, but there are also institutional cultures sometimes that pertain to faculties, disciplines, and professions. But all of them must actually have an intellectual content, social justice orientation, and a democratic orientation. So for me, I've said in many graduations when we still had the physical ones, that what you can't have is people, you know, who come into the institution and they're expected to follow how things have always been done. Or people who come into the institution and say, right, now I am here, everything must change. But that the notion of co-creating institutional cultures is very, very important, because you have a unique laboratory here where there are certain cultures, certain histories, but there are people who have come from something different and they should not be forced into something that already exists. There you have an opportunity, I think, to create something new, which is not to say it is easy. You know, cultures do not exist simply in a vacuum. They're also related to power and the way in which people relate to each other.
Thank you, VC. There's a question now from Ntombenhle Gama. I will direct this one to the DVC. Ntombenhle is saying, after submitting plans by faculties and departments, how will we be held accountable to ensure we do what we proposed? And this question, DVC, to me, also it boils down to the aspect that why don't we celebrate transformation, and why is the process of transformation difficult and not easy?
Well, the difficulty of the process, I suppose what one can say, just all the bat initially, is that it is less difficult now than, say, 10 years ago. It's easier to have this discussion now than it had been 10 years ago. We know how defensive people had been when the whole notion of the transformation of the curriculum came up. I think there's a greater openness now to discuss this. If we could just go back to that question so I can respond appropriately to it.
Can we? Previous question. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Now, fortunately, at the moment, the way in which we're functioning is about ensuring that there's peer accountability. So faculties will formulate their plans, and they will tell us which of the objectives they had met. That will be scrutinized, obviously, by the Deputy Deans Teaching and Learning of the faculty, but it will, I mean, the Deputy Deans Teaching and Learning also get together in a community of practice, and we'll compare how faculties are doing with compare how faculties are doing in relation to the other faculties. And I think that type of scrutiny normally encourages us to strive towards meeting the objectives of the university. But I suppose the hard truth at the end of the day is that where faculties do not, I suppose, transform their curricula in line with the needs of contemporary society, they are going to lose staff and students. Because students are not going to come to our university if we do not give them an excellent and context-appropriate and also global education. They will simply use their feet to vote and go elsewhere. So it's imperative. So we need not have a system within the university where we act punitively towards departments that are not coming on board. I mean, we do this through persuasion, and we do this because we know that faculties will do this because they are interested in their students. Excellence in terms of teaching and learning, and they want to remain competitive. They want the best students to be attracted to their faculties. The best students won't come to you if you've got an inappropriate curriculum.
If I can just briefly, sure. The curriculum transformation depends on a number of things. It depends on training, which is to have the specialized knowledge. It depends on the will to want to change, but it also depends on imagination. So I would say to the colleagues, those of you who are making progress, keep making progress and not look at your neighbor and look for your neighbors to be, to get into trouble. Do your thing and be part of the change in your faculty. These things and these processes take time. But I fully agree with Professor Duncan that a punitive model for this will not work.
Thank you. We now go to the next question. The name is Get Real. It means we need to be realistic pertaining to the implementation of curriculum transformation. Since this one, it's hard, it's a bit of a challenge. The VC will set the tone to ensure that we fully implement the process of a curriculum transformation. It's not only seen as a talk shop. And this question is, will students be allowed to provide feedback once the implementation process begins pertaining to curriculum transformation? VC?
I take it for granted that they will, because I don't see how you could possibly go through a process like this without feedback from the various stakeholders. Recall the earlier questions also asked about student participation. And I think the answers from all of us was, yes, students must be integral, because these are the people also, by the way, who are being educated or doing the learning. So how will you measure, even using an app or not, that your curriculum is transforming if you are not hearing feedback from your students? So the answer here is an unequivocal yes, but then we can find the instruments necessary. So this could be a separate, survey, if you like, or qualitative focus group discussions additional to the normal, course evaluations. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We now move swiftly, in the interest of time, to the question of Brenda Vivian. And this I will direct it to Professor Mudiri. Are there plans to assess the language and writing practices and conventions which are considered by the university to be academic?
Those are discipline-specific questions. Each discipline has its conventions. If I ask you to write an essay, you can't write me a journal entry or a novel. You see, if I ask you to write a novel, then you mustn't write an essay. It's linked to the politics of knowledge, of how people express themselves. What is the role of lived experience in how we write, or how do we, practices of citation, politics of citation. That will be, I hope, and invite Brenda in her particular faculty and across to ask those questions, because those are very much part of how we think about research, teaching, and scholarship. But maybe it's time to say, it's also not a free-for-all. We're working within specific frameworks of knowledge production. We're working within specific avenues. The academic journal is not the same as a self-published novel. These are all important, but they're different. So the question is the mode of communication fit for its particular purpose? Are you addressing a scientific community? Are you addressing lay people? What are your understandings of lay people's levels of literacy? How do we think about language in the form of expression, the English standards, and so forth? So it's part of the question that will be part of the faculty's own self-evaluation. It's very discipline-specific.
DVC?
If I could also just add, I mean, this is an important area of scholarship, scholarly inquiry, and we've got people in the Faculty of Humanities working on this. I mean, that question can be directed to them, particularly to Dr. Trish Cooper and her colleagues in the Unit for Academic Literacy. I fully agree with what Professor Modiri had said. The standards really are determined by the discipline in which you are. And yes, we want to communicate amongst ourselves with our students, but we also want to communicate with an international community. And there we write in a way that will obviously be understandable or understood in that international community.
Thank you. The last question which we will take this afternoon is from Quincy, and it relates to, as a university, teaching and learning and research should be integrated. Will our approach to research also transform? We still use Western philosophies and methodologies. I'll give each panel member an opportunity to engage this question. VC?
Yeah, I think recently in part of our reimagining UP and what we offer, we've spoken about breaking away from disciplinary bound notions of research. In fact, if you look at many of our top scholars, creative, innovative, and curious people, they're doing research across disciplinary boundaries. I'm looking at you because I think you're in your subject area, if you like, jurisprudence, which is like theory of law. You wouldn't possibly do your research well if you didn't think of political philosophy, sociology, and other related disciplines. So, and clearly, why should we do this? Because we want impact. We want our research to change, the lives of our people. So, and also the way in which we do research doesn't necessarily. There are, as Prof. Modiri said, there are established norms in how you do research. But also there's a lot of room for, if you're doing ethnographic research, for example, as an African researcher in our communities, you are at a huge advantage from the old, colonial or Western psychologists or sociologists who would not speak the language and needed a native as a translator. But translation in itself is a form of creating knowledge. But if you have first-hand knowledge of Sesotho, and you're doing ethnographic research in that particular area, or even medical research, you are at such a superior advantage of getting to know things in a much more nuanced fashion. So, but let me put it this way. Yes, we need to reflect on how we do research while staying within globally accepted norms, have the space and creativity to contribute to methodologies, and therefore theory building and also analysis.
DVC?
Yeah, I concur with what the Vice Chancellor had said. Obviously, I mean, we would want to ensure transformation in all spheres of activity, all spheres of functioning. I do believe that the colleagues who focus a lot of their attention on research has also focused on the need, I suppose, to do research that's appropriate for our times and our context. And it's also that's connected to the global community. But this also is a work in progress, and it changes from day to day. It will change into the future, and one has to then once again rely on academics or scholars to be self-critical, to constantly interrogate what they're doing, whether it is appropriate. And so we can't have an imposition of a system according to which people are going to do it. These are the steps, these are the criteria. This is what's expected of academics and of scholars, to be constantly self-critical and to do the types of research that is impactful. So untransformed research, I mean, whatever that means, I mean, will certainly not be read. People will only read what is meaningful to them.
Thank you. Thank you very much, DVC academic. In the interest of time, Professor Modiri, unfortunately, I can't take your inputs, but allow me now to thank the VC, Professor Tawana Kupe, the DVC academic, Professor Norman Duncan, and yourself, Professor Modiri. Thank you very much, and thank you to colleagues who are joining us at home, as well as our students. We truly appreciate. But in this seminar, let's kindly remember that this is the start of a journey as we are relaunching this curriculum transformation drive. And it's important that one can be able to take stock pertaining to this and to recall these famous words that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So we are taking serious strides to ensure that we achieve a curriculum that is transformed, working together as with the student community and the academics. But most importantly, it's very much key that our collaboration in our diversity will surely yield positive results for us to reach this important milestone. I would like to thank you once more, and that please stay safe and enjoy the rest of your evening. Rea leboga, ra kensa, baya danki. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.